The town was called Hollowdale. It lay nestled in a valley, often draped in mist. Houses huddled close, their windows like watchful eyes. On the surface, it was an ordinary place, full of ordinary people, doing ordinary things. But Hollowdale held a secret, a quiet, persistent absence. In this town lived a girl. She walked its cobbled streets, she breathed its damp air. Yet she was different. She carried a space where a name should be. She had no name that she knew, and no one in Hollowdale knew it either. It was a strange, invisible emptiness. She possessed a gentle spirit. Her hands were often busy, mending a bird's broken wing, offering a warm drink to a shivering traveler. She spoke softly to the stray cats that roamed the alleyways. They seemed to understand her better than people did. Her eyes were wide, full of questions. She looked at the world with an innocent curiosity. She wondered about the stars. She wondered about the whispers of the wind. Most of all, she wondered about names. Why did the baker have one, and the blacksmith and the mayor? Why was she the only one without this simple, essential thing? The question was a constant, quiet hum beneath her days. The forgetting was a peculiar magic, a stubborn, silent refusal. People tried to name her, of course, kind neighbors, well-meaning elders, but the words would catch in their throats. Their tongues would stumble, lost and confused. Their minds would cloud over, a sudden fog rolling in. Even she, the girl herself, could not grasp it. If she tried to think of what her name might be, it was like clutching at smoke. A sound fading on the breeze, always just beyond her reach. This collective amnesia was a heavy cloak, one she wore without choice. It set her apart in ways she keenly felt. She would not simply accept this void, this blank page where her story should begin. A quiet determination began to flicker within her. At first her search was small, timid. She would ask the oldest residents, those whose memories stretched back like ancient trees. She would spend hours in the dusty town hall, poring over old records, ledgers, and maps. The pages smelled of time and neglect, but they offered no clues, only more silence, more unanswered questions. Yet, with every closed door, with every blank stare, her resolve did not waver. It grew stronger, a tiny seed pushing its way through the hard, unyielding earth of forgetting. Her quest for a name grew bolder. It pulled her away from the familiar streets of Hollowdale. She ventured towards the shadowed woods, towards the whispering hills at the town's edge. These were places mothers warned their children about, places where old tales lingered like morning frost. She listened intently to the rustle of unseen creatures in the undergrowth. She watched the way shadows stretched and danced, forming fleeting, suggestive shapes. A feeling grew inside her, a subtle tug, guiding her towards something ancient, something that held memories the town had lost. She sensed, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that the answer was not in the sunlit world. It lay hidden in the forgotten corners. Following this unseen thread, she found her, an old woman, living alone, in a cottage almost swallowed by ivy and creeping vines. The air around the dwelling felt different, thicker, charged with unspoken things. The path to the door was barely visible. The woman who opened it had eyes like polished river stones, deep, knowing. They seemed to hold the weight of centuries, of countless stories. The girl felt a shiver trace its way down her spine, a mixture of fear and a desperate rising hope. This was it. This was the place. This was the person who might hold the key. The old woman's voice, when she finally spoke, sounded like dry leaves skittering across stone. It was a voice that knew secrets. She acknowledged the girl. She seemed to have been expecting her. She knew about the namelessness, about the town's peculiar forgetting. "Your name," the old woman stated, her gaze unwavering, was deliberately hidden. The words hung in the still air of the cramped room, heavy with implication. It was done for your protection. Protection. The word echoed in the girl's mind. Protection from what? Or whom? The girl felt a new layer of mystery envelop her. The silence in the cottage was profound, broken only by the soft crackle of a dying fire in the hearth. The girl had to know more. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, yet filled with an urgent need. "What was I being protected from?" She looked directly into those ancient eyes. The old woman studied her for a long moment, a searching, measuring gaze, as if weighing the girl's readiness for the truth. "Some powers," she finally breathed, her voice dropping lower, "are too great for the unprepared." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "Some names carry echoes, resonances, echoes of a dangerous, slumbering past." The girl shivered, though the room was not cold. A past she could not recall, a name she could not speak. The enigma deepened, coiling around her like a waiting serpent. The old woman then began to speak of a fire. But this was no ordinary blaze of wood and flame. This fire had swept through Hollowdale long ago, perhaps around the time the girl was born. Or perhaps its arrival coincided with her first breath. It was a strange, selective fire. It did not consume houses or char trees, it burned memories, it devoured sounds, it specifically targeted names. It was a silent, creeping inferno that had passed through the town, leaving behind a very particular kind of emptiness. This fire, the old woman explained, was not an accident, it was a consequence. And it was a key. She leaned closer, her presence filling the small space. Her breath was a strange mix of dried herbs and old parchment. They tried to erase it, she rasped, your name, they feared it. They sought to stop it from ever being spoken aloud again. The old woman explained that the fire itself was a reaction, a desperate measure, an attempt to contain something powerful, something intrinsically linked to the girl's true, forgotten name. This name was not merely a label, it was far more. It was a catalyst, a trigger, a word that could awaken things best left undisturbed. Things that had slept for a very long time. Then, in the dim light of the cottage, the old woman imparted the knowledge. Perhaps she spoke the name itself, a single resonant word that vibrated in the air. Or perhaps she gave the girl the hidden path to find it within her own being. The girl felt it then, a click, a sensation of a lost piece sliding perfectly into place, deep within her core. She saw the name, not written, but known, spelled out in the fabric of her mind's eye. It felt impossibly ancient, incredibly powerful. For a fleeting moment she hesitated. The air in the cottage grew utterly still. The world outside seemed to hold its breath, waiting. With a courage she didn't know she possessed, she spoke it. Her name. The sound left her lips clear and true. It did not just fill the small room, it echoed, further than seemed possible, out into Hollowdale, out into the listening world. The very ground beneath her feet seemed to hum in response, a low, powerful tremor. The air around her crackled with an unseen energy. An ancient presence stirred from its long, deep slumber. It was like the slow, deliberate awakening of a giant. The change was immediate, palpable, irreversible. The power hidden for so long was now real, and it was undeniably, overwhelmingly terrifying. In that exact moment, across Hollowdale, memory returned. The name rushed back, flooding into the minds of every townsperson, unbidden, undeniable. It settled onto their tongues as if it had always been there. They stopped, mid-sentence, mid-stride. The baker's hands stilled in his dough. The blacksmith's hammer clattered to the stone floor. Children, deep in their games, paused and looked up. A wave of confusion washed over them, followed by a dawning, chilling recognition. And with that recognition came a different feeling. Not the relief of a puzzle solved, but a cold, creeping dread. They remembered. The ancient presence, awakened by the spoken name, began to make itself known. Not as a roaring beast, not as a physical terror, not yet. It manifested as a subtle, pervasive shift in the very atmosphere of Hollowdale. The sky above the town seemed to deepen, its blue tinged with an unfamiliar shadow. The familiar shadows in the lanes and alleyways seemed longer, darker, more substantial. The wind, which had always whispered secrets of the ordinary, now carried a new sound. It whispered her name, the girl's name. The world felt older, more fragile, more dangerous. The forgotten magic so carefully buried was awake, and it was listening intently. The people of Hollowdale knew. The return of the name brought back the terror. They remembered why it had been lost, why the strange fire had been necessary, why silence had been their only shield for so long. Now they looked at the girl who was no longer nameless. They saw her, but their eyes held no kindness, no welcome, only a profound, shared fear. They could speak her name now. The fog in their minds was gone, but they would not. They dared not. The word was a spark, and they remembered all too well the inferno that spark could unleash upon them all. The girl stood alone, surrounded by people yet utterly isolated. She was no longer the girl with no name. She had her identity, her true self, but it had come at a great cost. It carried a terrible, unknown weight, a power she did not understand and could not control, a fear that now bound her to her town in a new, unwelcome way. Some names, she began to understand with a sinking heart, were indeed meant to be forgotten, locked away in the deepest vaults of silence. For the safety of everyone, her journey to find her name had ended, and a new, far more perilous one had just begun.